Mastering research ethics. Researchers must choose between credible data and human decency. How can researchers strike a balance between their obligation to collect sufficient data for meaningful research findings and their ethical responsibility to safeguard participants from physical, emotional, or psychological harm throughout the entire research process? Striking a balance between collecting sufficient data for meaningful research findings and safeguarding participants from harm is a delicate task that requires researchers to adopt a prudent and multidimensional approach. This balance can be achieved by implementing various measures throughout the entire research process, from study design to data collection, analysis, and dissemination. Firstly, researchers must ensure that they have a clear understanding of the research question and objectives, as well as the potential risks and benefits associated with the study. This involves conducting a thorough literature review, consulting with experts, and engaging with stakeholders to identify potential pitfalls and areas of concern. By doing so, researchers can design a study that minimizes the risk of harm to participants while maximizing the potential for meaningful research findings. Before commencing the study, researchers must obtain informed consent from participants, ensuring that they understand the nature of the research, the potential risks and benefits, and their rights as participants. Informed consent must be obtained voluntarily, without coercion or deceit, and participants must be free to withdraw from the study at any time without penalty. Researchers must also ensure that participants are aware of their rights, including the right to confidentiality, anonymity, and access to their personal data. To minimize the risk of harm, researchers must implement robust risk assessment and mitigation strategies throughout the research process. This involves identifying potential risks, assessing their likelihood and impact, and developing strategies to mitigate or eliminate them. Researchers must also establish clear protocols for responding to adverse events, including procedures for reporting and managing incidents, and providing support to affected participants. Data collection methods must be designed to minimize the risk of harm, while maximizing the quality and validity of the data. Researchers must select methods that are appropriate for the research question and study population, and that do not expose participants to unnecessary risks or discomfort. For example, researchers conducting surveys or interviews must ensure that the questions are clear, concise, and non-leading, and that participants are not asked to disclose sensitive or potentially distressing information. Researchers must also ensure that they have the necessary skills, training, and expertise to collect and analyze data in a way that is respectful, sensitive, and culturally appropriate. This may involve collaborating with other researchers or experts, or seeking guidance from community leaders or advocacy groups. By doing so, researchers can ensure that they are collecting high-quality data that is relevant, reliable, and generalizable to the study population. To safeguard participants from emotional or psychological harm, researchers must establish a supportive and non-judgmental research environment. This involves creating a safe space for participants to share their experiences, feelings, and opinions, and providing access to support services, such as counseling or debriefing, as needed. Researchers must also be mindful of their own emotional and psychological well-being, and seek support if needed, to avoid burnout, compassion fatigue, or other forms of researcher fatigue. Data analysis and interpretation must also be conducted in a way that is transparent, systematic, and free from bias. Researchers must use appropriate statistical methods, and ensure that the data is accurately coded, cleaned, and analyzed. They must also be mindful of the potential for data dredging, cherry-picking, or other forms of researcher bias, and take steps to mitigate these risks. When disseminating research findings, researchers must ensure that they do so in a way that is respectful, accurate, and culturally sensitive. This involves sharing findings in a clear, concise, and accessible manner, and avoiding language or terminology that may be technical, jargon-heavy, or offensive. Researchers must also be mindful of the potential impact of their findings on participants, communities, or wider society, and take steps to minimize any potential harm or stigmatization. Finally, researchers must be committed to ongoing learning and improvement, and be willing to adapt their research design, methods, and practices in response to emerging issues or concerns. This involves ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the research process, and a willingness to make changes as needed to ensure that participants are protected from harm and that the research is conducted with integrity and respect. By adopting a proactive, participant-centered, and multidimensional approach, researchers can strike a balance between collecting sufficient data for meaningful research findings and safeguarding participants from physical, emotional, or psychological harm throughout the entire research process. This requires a commitment to operational excellence, a willingness to adapt and learn, and a deep respect for the rights, dignity, and well-being of research participants.